I used to think family was supposed to be your safe place, you know? The people who'd never betray you, never lie to your face, never steal what was rightfully yours, and smile while doing it. But what happens when the person who backstabbed you shares your DNA? What happens when you discover that for years, literal years, you've been living a version of reality that was completely fabricated, manipulated, and designed to keep you invisible while someone else lived the life that should have been yours? I couldn't believe it when the truth finally exposed itself that Sunday afternoon, sitting in my grandfather's house, learning that I'd been cheated out of not just a car, but an entire existence I never knew I deserved. The shocking part wasn't even the theft itself. It was realizing how long I'd been conditioned to accept being erased, how deeply I'd internalized the message that I simply wasn't worth protecting. They say the truth will set you free, but nobody warns you that first it'll absolutely destroy everything you thought you knew about the people you love. What happened next changed me in ways I'm still discovering, taught me that sometimes revenge isn't about getting even. It's about finally reclaiming the self-worth and dignity that was stolen from you piece by piece, year after year, until you almost forgot you ever had it to begin with. I still remember the exact moment everything started to unravel, you know? I was sitting in the back of that Uber, watching the familiar streets of Portland blur past my window, heading to Grandpa Richard's house for Sunday dinner. My phone buzzed with his text. "Can't wait to see you, sweetheart." I smiled, completely unaware that in less than 10 minutes, my entire understanding of my family would shatter into a million pieces. The driver pulled up to the curb. I paid, grabbed my bag, and walked up that driveway I'd known my whole life, feeling safe, feeling loved, feeling like I belonged. Grandpa opened the door with his usual bear hug, but then he stepped back and looked past me toward the street with this confused expression on his face. "Claire, honey, where's your car?" he asked, his thick eyebrows pulling together in genuine concern. I laughed awkwardly because I thought he was joking, but his face stayed serious, almost worried. "What car, Grandpa?" I said, still smiling like an idiot, thinking maybe he'd mixed me up with someone else. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. "The SUV I bought you 6 months ago. The burgundy one?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing, honestly. My brain just froze right there in the doorway. "You bought me a car?" I repeated slowly, searching his eyes for some sign this was a weird prank or a misunderstanding. Grandpa looked genuinely shocked now, his face going pale as he realized something was very, very wrong. "Claire, I spent over $30,000 on that vehicle. Put it in your name, got the title, the insurance, everything," he said, his voice shaking slightly. My hands went numb, my heart started pounding, and this sick feeling of betrayal crept up my spine like ice water. Before I could even process what he just told me, I heard her voice from inside the house, that sugary, fake cheerful tone that always made my skin crawl. "Oh, Claire's here!" Mom called out, appearing in the hallway with that painted-on smile she reserved for family gatherings. She walked right up to us like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just been caught in something terrible, and I watched Grandpa's face shift from confusion to something darker. "Patricia," he said slowly, using that tone he only broke out when he was about to lose it. "Why did Claire arrive in an Uber?" Mom's smile flickered for just a second, just long enough for me to see the panic flash across her eyes. Then she laughed, actually laughed, and waved her hand like this was all some silly misunderstanding we'd clear up over dinner. "Oh, well, you see, Brooke needed the car more, Dad," she said so casually, like she was talking about borrowing a sweater, not stealing a $30,000 gift. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and poisonous, and I watched my grandfather's face turn red. I felt this strange numbness spreading through my body, this disconnection from reality, because surely this wasn't happening. Surely my own mother hadn't just admitted to stealing from me with a smile on her face. But deep down, in that place where I'd buried years of being invisible and overlooked, I knew this was just the beginning of the truth finally crawling into the light. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always come with dramatic music or a big confrontation. Sometimes it arrives wearing your mother's face, smiling at you like you're the crazy one for being upset. Mom stood there in Grandpa's entryway, smoothing down her blouse like she'd just commented on the weather, not confessed to stealing a car that was legally mine. Brooke needed it more, Claire. You understand, don't you? She said, tilting her head with that patronizing sympathy she always used when she was gaslighting me. I felt my throat tighten, my vision blur slightly at the edges, because this wasn't new. This was the story of my entire life playing out in real time. Grandpa's hand landed on my shoulder, steady and firm, anchoring me to reality. Patricia, what the hell are you talking about? Grandpa's voice cut through the air like a knife, sharp and furious in a way I'd rarely heard. Mom's smile faltered for real this time, her eyes darting between us as she tried to calculate her next move. Well, Brooke and Mark just bought their house, and they needed reliable transportation for the baby they're planning, and Claire's always been so independent, so I just thought. She rambled, her words tumbling out faster and faster. The audacity of it stunned me into silence. She was actually trying to justify this, to make it sound reasonable, like payback for me being independent, was losing something I didn't even know existed. My hands started shaking, so I shoved them into my pockets. Grandpa stepped forward, his whole body radiating fury, and I saw Mom actually take a step back. You thought? He repeated, his voice dangerously quiet now. You thought you'd just redirect a gift I specifically bought for Claire? Put in Claire's name? And what? Hoped I'd never find out? The way he said it made something click in my brain, made me realize this wasn't just about a car. This was about a pattern, a lifetime of being erased and rewritten. Mom opened her mouth, closed it, then tried that smile again. Dad, you're being dramatic. It's still in the family, and Brooke sends you pictures with it all the time. You've seen how happy she is, she said, like that somehow made the theft okay. That's when my brain started connecting dots I'd been too blind or too conditioned to see before. Those Instagram posts from Brooke, the ones where she posed next to that gorgeous burgundy SUV, captioned, "My amazing husband surprised me," with a million heart emojis and comments from friends congratulating Mark on being such a great provider. I remembered seeing those posts, feeling that familiar ache of being the sister who never got the fairy tale, never got the grand gestures, never got noticed. The shocking truth hit me like a physical blow. That car was mine. Those posts were lies. And my sister had been parading around in my gift while I struggled with bus schedules and ride shares for 6 months. The humiliation of it burned through my chest. Let me get this straight. I finally found my voice, though it came out shaky and raw. Grandpa bought me a car, a whole entire SUV, and you, what? Just gave it to Brooke and told him it was for me? I looked at my mother, really looked at her, searching for some sign of remorse, some hint of the woman who was supposed to protect me. But all I saw was defensiveness and irritation that she'd been caught. Claire, you're making this into something it's not. Family helps family. That's what we do, she said, using that wounded tone like I was the villain in this story. But Grandpa's grip on my shoulder tightened, and I finally knew, that someone saw through the performance. Someone was about to demand justice, and the truth was about to get a whole lot messier. Grandpa Richard didn't waste a single second. He turned on his heel and marched straight to his office, leaving Mom and me standing in that hallway like actors who'd forgotten their lines. "Richard, please, let's just talk about this calmly," Mom called after him, her voice climbing an octave higher, panic finally cracking through that plastic composure. I followed him, my legs moving on autopilot, because honestly, I needed to see this. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind, that this nightmare was actually real. He yanked open a filing cabinet with such force, I heard papers rustle and shift inside, then pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Claire, Vehicle, in his neat handwriting. The sight of that folder, the weight of it as he dropped it on his desk, made my chest feel tight. This was real. This had happened. And I'd been lied to for half a year. "Here," Grandpa said, spreading documents across the mahogany surface like evidence at a crime scene. And honestly, that's exactly what this was. The title showed my name, Claire Catherine Morrison, as the legal owner of a 2024 Burgundy Ford Explorer, purchased outright with cashier's check on March 15th. There were insurance documents, registration papers, even the original sales contract with my forged signature that I definitely never signed. I have the emails with the dealership, the bank transfers, everything, Grandpa continued, his fingers stabbing at each piece of paper as Mom appeared in the doorway, her face drained of color. Then he pulled out his phone, scrolled for a moment, and turned the screen toward me. And there it was, a photo of me, standing next to that burgundy SUV, smiling with keys in hand. Except that wasn't me. That was Brooke, my older sister, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, her smile wide and triumphant in a way mine never quite managed to be. I felt this wave of nausea roll through me as I stared at that photo, at how easily I could be replaced, erased, rewritten in my own story. Mom sent me this picture 6 months ago. Said you were so grateful you cried, Grandpa said quietly, and I heard the betrayal in his voice too. He'd been played just as much as I had. Mom made this weird gasping sound from the doorway, like she'd been caught with her hand literally in the cookie jar. Dad, I can explain. Brooke was just testing it out for Claire, making sure it ran well before she started, but even she couldn't finish that sentence because it was such obvious garbage. Stop, I said, surprised by how steady my voice came out despite the storm raging inside my chest. I picked up that photo, zoomed in on the details I'd missed before. Brooke's engagement ring that she'd gotten 2 years ago, the Tesla logo on Mark's keychain in the background, the house number barely visible that matched their new address in the suburbs. This was taken at Brooke's house, I said slowly, each word feeling like I was assembling a puzzle I'd been staring at my whole life without seeing the picture. Then it clicked even harder. All those Instagram posts, the ones where she'd captioned it as Mark's gift, the comments where she'd replied to friends saying, "I'm so blessed," and "He works so hard for us." She'd stolen my car and turned it into social media content, into proof of her perfect life, while I'd been invisible once again. The room went completely silent except for the ticking of Grandpa's old clock on the wall, and I watched my mother's face cycle through a dozen different emotions: shame, anger, defensiveness, calculation. "Patricia," Grandpa said, and his voice was so cold it made me shiver. "You committed fraud. You forged documents, and you lied to me for 6 months while Claire struggled without transportation." Mom's mouth opened and closed like a fish, and I could see her brain working overtime to spin this, to find some angle that made her the victim or the peacemaker. But there was no spinning this. The receipts were literally spread across the desk, proof in black and white that I'd been backstabbed by the 2 people who were supposed to love me most. And as I stood there, staring at that photo of my sister in my car living my gift, I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been asleep or suppressed for way too long. Standing in that office, staring at the evidence of my own erasure, I felt 22 years of memories flood back like a dam had finally burst open. This wasn't the first time, God, it wasn't even the 10th time, that Brooke had gotten what was meant for me, what should have been mine, what I'd worked for or been promised. I remembered being 12 years old, saving birthday money for months to buy this laptop I needed for school, only to come home and find it in Brooke's room because she needed it for her college applications, and you can use the old desktop, Claire. Mom had said it so casually, like my savings and my needs just didn't matter as much. The pattern was there, had always been there. I'd just been trained not to see it, or worse, to accept it as normal. Every Christmas, every birthday, every milestone, Brooke got the spotlight, the big gift, the family celebration, while I got the practical stuff, the "we'll make it up to you later" promises that never materialized. When Brooke graduated high school, they threw her this massive party with a DJ and catering and a cake that cost more than my monthly grocery budget now. When I graduated 2 years later with honors and a scholarship, we went to Applebee's, and Mom spent half the dinner on her phone coordinating Brooke's engagement party. I'd told myself it was fine, that I was just different, more independent, that I didn't need the validation or the fanfare. But that was a lie I'd learned to tell myself to survive the constant humiliation of being the daughter who didn't quite measure up. The truth was, it hurt. It had always hurt, and I'd just gotten really good at pretending it didn't. The family betrayal went deeper than stolen cars and forged documents. It was in every choice, every priority, every moment where I'd been made invisible so Brooke could shine brighter. I thought about the college fund that was supposed to be split equally between us, the one Grandma had set up before she died. Somehow, Brooke's half had covered 4 years at a private university, while mine had mysteriously run out after 1 semester, forcing me to work 2 jobs and take out loans for a state school. There were some investment losses, honey. It's not our fault, Dad had said. But Brooke's Instagram had been full of sorority formals and spring break trips to Cancun. Nobody questioned where that money came from. Nobody wanted to question it, because asking questions meant acknowledging that their golden child wasn't quite as self-sufficient as they liked to pretend. I'd become a ghost in my own family, the one who was always fine, always figured it out, always made do with less, while Brooke got more. And the worst part? I'd accepted it. I'd internalized this idea that maybe I just wasn't worth the same investment, the same attention, the same love. When I needed a co-signer for my first apartment, and Dad said no because you need to learn independence, I didn't push back. I found a more expensive place that didn't require one. When my car broke down last year and I asked Mom for a small loan to fix it, she'd said, "Claire, you're 22, you can't keep depending on us," while literally paying Brooke's phone bill, car insurance, and gym membership. The gaslighting had been so consistent, so pervasive, that I'd started believing I was the problem, that my needs were too much, my expectations unreasonable, my hurt unjustified. But standing there with proof in my hands that they'd literally stolen from me and lied about it for months, something inside me cracked wide open. This wasn't about being independent or self-sufficient. This was about systematic favoritism, about being cheated out of my place in this family since the day Brooke was born 3 years before me. Every opportunity that had fallen through, every gift that had been redirected, every promise that had been broken. It was all part of the same pattern, the same ugly truth that I'd been too conditioned or too scared to name. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from rage, from grief, from the dawning realization that reclaiming my self-worth meant confronting decades of being told I was worth less. And as Grandpa gathered those documents with trembling hands and Mom tried to salvage her image with more excuses, I knew this moment was going to change everything. Grandpa Richard straightened up from his desk, those documents clutched in his weathered hands, and turned to face my mother with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, unfiltered disappointment mixed with barely contained fury. "Patricia, I'm going to ask you one time, and I want the truth," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that made the air in the room feel thick and suffocating. "How exactly did you change the registration from Claire's name to Brooke's, when I have the original title right here with Claire's name on it?" Mom's face went through this rapid transformation. First pale, then flushed, then this weird gray color like all the blood had just drained from her body. She looked at the door like she was calculating whether she could just run, just leave and pretend this conversation never happened. But Grandpa took a step forward, and she froze. I called the dealership," Mom finally whispered, her voice so small I almost didn't hear it. "I told them there'd been a mistake, that the wrong daughter's information had been used, and I had Claire's old documents from when she got her driver's license updated, so I just..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, unable to say out loud what she'd actually done. Grandpa's face turned red, a vein pulsing in his temple that made me genuinely worried he might have a stroke right there in his office. "You committed fraud," he said flatly, and hearing it said so plainly, so directly, made the reality of it crash over me like a wave. "You used your daughter's personal information, you lied to a car dealership, you forged documents, and you stole $30,000 worth of property. That's not a family disagreement, Patricia. That's multiple felonies." Mom started crying then, these big theatrical sobs that I'd seen her use 1,000 times to deflect accountability, to make herself the victim in situations where she was clearly the villain. "Dad, please, I was just trying to help Brooke. She was struggling, and Claire's always been so capable, and I thought..." But Grandpa cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Stop," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "Stop making excuses. Stop trying to manipulate this situation, and for once in your life, take responsibility for what you've done." I stood there watching my mother crumble, and I waited to feel sympathy, waited to feel that familiar urge to smooth things over and make everyone comfortable. But all I felt was this cold, clarifying anger that sharpened everything into focus. This was justice starting to happen, truth finally being spoken, and it felt both terrifying and necessary. "Claire." Grandpa turned to me, his eyes softening slightly but still holding that steel underneath. "I need you to understand something. This car is legally yours, has always been yours, and what your mother did is prosecutable theft and fraud." The weight of those words settled over me, the reality that this had crossed from family drama into actual criminal behavior. Mom's sobs got louder, more desperate. "You can't, Claire, please. I'm your mother. You can't let him. Think about Brooke. Think about the baby they're planning. Think about what this would do to the family." And there it was. The manipulation I'd fallen for my entire life. The weaponizing of family loyalty to protect people who'd shown me none. But something had shifted in me. Something fundamental. I was done protecting people who'd never protected me. Done sacrificing my dignity so others could avoid consequences. "Where's the car now?" Grandpa asked, pulling out his phone with a decisive energy that made it clear he was done talking and ready for action. Mom wiped her eyes, mascara streaking down her cheeks in black rivers. "It's at Brooke's house, but Richard, please, can't we just—" She reached for his arm, but he pulled away like her touch burned. "I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the police if necessary. And I'm getting that vehicle back into Claire's possession by end of day," he declared, already dialing, his jaw set in that stubborn way that meant no amount of begging would change his mind. I watched my mother's face cycle through rage, panic, and then this cold calculation, and I knew she was already planning her next move, already thinking about how to spin this to Brooke, to Dad, to the rest of the family. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care what story she told, because the truth was on my side now, documented and undeniable. What happened next felt like watching a movie and fast forward, except I was standing right in the center of it, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Grandpa had his lawyer on speakerphone within minutes, a sharp-voiced woman named Catherine who'd apparently handled his business affairs for 30 years and didn't mess around. "Richard, if the title is in Claire's name and Patricia altered dealership records without authorization, that's textbook fraud and theft." Catherine's voice crackled through the speaker, clinical and certain. "I'm sending a cease and desist to Patricia immediately, and Claire has every legal right to recover that vehicle, by force if necessary." Mom made this strangled sound, her hands flying to her mouth, and I saw genuine fear flash across her face for the first time. This wasn't going away. This wasn't something she could smooth over with tears and excuses. Grandpa didn't stop there. He called a towing company he'd used for years, explained the situation in his no-nonsense way, and within 20 minutes had arranged for them to retrieve the SUV from Brooke's address. "I'm texting you the location now, and yes, Claire will provide proof of ownership," he said into the phone, his eyes never leaving Mom's face. I watched her deflate in real time, her whole body sagging against the door frame like someone had cut her strings. "Richard, please. Brooke doesn't know. She'll be blindsided. Can't we at least call her first?" Mom pleaded, but there was something almost pathetic about it now, this desperate attempt to control a situation that had already spiraled completely beyond her grasp. Grandpa just shook his head. "You had 6 months to do the right thing, Patricia. You chose lies and theft instead." The next hour was this surreal blur of phone calls, paperwork, and watching my grandfather orchestrate karma with the precision of a military general. He had me sign affidavits, make copies of my driver's license, pull up my credit report to prove identity. Every piece of documentation needed to reclaim what was mine. "This is important, Claire," he told me during a quiet moment, while we waited for callbacks. "This isn't just about a car. This is about establishing that you will not be stolen from, that you have worth, that you deserve justice." His words hit me right in the chest, made my eyes sting with tears I'd been holding back since this whole nightmare started. Nobody had ever fought for me like this. Nobody had ever made me feel like I deserved to be defended, and the shocking realization that I'd lived 22 years without that basic support nearly broke me. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was the tow truck driver, sending me a photo of my burgundy SUV loaded onto his flatbed, headed back to Grandpa's house. I stared at that image, at the vehicle I'd never even known existed until a few hours ago, and felt this strange mixture of vindication and grief. "It's coming," I told Grandpa, showing him the screen, and he nodded with grim satisfaction. Mom had disappeared somewhere in the house, probably calling Brooke, probably spinning some version of events where she was the victim, and I was the ungrateful daughter causing problems. But I didn't care anymore. Let her spin whatever story she wanted, because the physical evidence was about to roll into this driveway and prove once and for all that I'd been cheated, lied to, and backstabbed by the people who were supposed to love me most. When that tow truck finally pulled up in front of Grandpa's house, the sound of it rumbling to a stop felt like thunder announcing a storm. The driver got out, verified my identity, had me sign release forms, and then carefully unloaded that beautiful burgundy Ford Explorer onto the concrete like he was handling precious cargo. Grandpa stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, and I felt him squeeze gently as the SUV settled onto solid ground. My SUV, with my name on the title, finally in my possession. The driver handed me 2 sets of keys, and I closed my fingers around them. The metal warmed from his pocket, and something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about revenge or payback. This was about reclaiming space in a family that had tried to erase me, about demanding that my existence and my worth be acknowledged. And as I stood there holding those keys, with Grandpa beside me and that vehicle gleaming in the late afternoon sun, I knew this was only the beginning of everything changing. We'd barely gotten the SUV parked in Grandpa's driveway when I heard tires screeching around the corner, and I just knew, that Brooke had arrived. Her white sedan jerked to a stop at the curb, the door flying open before the engine even cut off. And there she was, my older sister, 6 months pregnant with her first baby, her face twisted in fury I'd never seen directed at me before. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she screamed across the lawn, one hand protectively on her rounded belly, the other pointing at me like I was some kind of criminal. Grandpa stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between us. But I moved around him. I was done hiding, done being protected from confrontations that were rightfully mine. "I'm taking back what's mine, Brooke," I said, surprised by how steady my voice came out despite my racing heart. Brooke stormed up the driveway, her designer maternity dress swishing around her legs, her perfectly styled hair somehow still intact despite the obvious panic driving her actions. "That car is mine. Mark and I have been making payments on it. We've been maintaining it. We've built our whole life around having that vehicle." Her voice cracked on the last word, tears starting to stream down her face, and I watched her deploy the same emotional manipulation tactics Mom had used just hours earlier, but Grandpa wasn't having it. "Brooke, stop right there," he commanded in that voice that had made his employees jump for 40 years. "That vehicle was never yours. I bought it for Claire. I put it in Claire's name, and your mother committed fraud to transfer it to you." The words hung in the air like a slap, and I saw my sister's face cycle through shock, denial, and then something that looked almost like guilt. I suspected something wasn't right," Brooke admitted quietly, her hand dropping from her belly to hang limply at her side. The confession hit me like a physical blow. She'd known, or at least questioned it, and she'd chosen to stay silent, chosen to keep what wasn't hers rather than ask uncomfortable questions. "You suspected?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. "You posted that car all over Instagram. You let everyone believe Mark bought it for you. You've been driving around in my gift for 6 months and you suspected something was wrong." The betrayal of it burned through my chest like acid, because this wasn't just Mom's crime anymore. Brooke had been complicit, had actively chosen to benefit from my loss. She at least had the decency to look ashamed, her eyes dropping to the pavement. "Claire, please, I'm pregnant. We need that car for the baby, for doctor's appointments, for—" Brooke started, reaching toward me with one trembling hand. And I actually laughed, this bitter sound that didn't feel like it came from my body. "So your baby's needs matter more than mine? Your convenience matters more than the fact that you've been driving stolen property?" I shot back, and I saw her flinch. Grandpa moved closer to me, his presence solid and supportive in a way I'd never experienced before. Brooke, I love you, but you and your mother have stolen from Claire. You've lied to me, and you've damaged this family in ways I'm not sure can be repaired, he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. That vehicle was never yours. It never belonged to you, and deep down you knew that. My sister's face crumpled, and she sank down onto Grandpa's front steps like her legs couldn't hold her anymore, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward and difficult. I didn't want to question it, she whispered, staring at her hands. Mom told me you'd agreed to it, that you didn't need a car right now, that Grandpa had approved the transfer, and I wanted so badly to believe her that I just didn't push. The admission should have made me feel vindicated, should have given me some sense of vengeance or satisfaction, but instead, I just felt exhausted and sad. This was my sister, the person I'd grown up with, shared a bathroom with, fought over toys with, and she'd chosen comfort over truth, chosen to lie to herself rather than protect me. It doesn't matter what Mom told you, I said finally, my voice softer, but no less firm. You're an adult, Brooke. You have a responsibility to question things that seem too good to be true, especially when they come at someone else's expense. And as she sat there crying on those steps, reality crashed down around all of us that this wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about who we were as people, as family, and whether any of that could be salvaged. Grandpa helped Brooke up from the steps and guided us all inside, his face grim as he settled into his leather armchair, with a heaviness that made him look every one of his 73 years. Girls, sit down, both of you, he said, and something in his tone told me this was about to get even worse than I'd imagined. Grandma Helen emerged from the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed like she'd been crying, carrying a folder I hadn't seen before, this one much thicker, much older, with years' worth of papers stuffed inside. We've been going through our records all afternoon, Grandma said softly, settling beside Grandpa and opening that folder with shaking hands. Ever since this came to light, we needed to understand the full scope of what's been happening. And Claire, sweetheart, I am so sorry we didn't see it sooner. What came next felt like being buried alive under an avalanche of betrayal. Each revelation, another shovel of dirt on top of my chest. Grandma started reading from bank statements, from canceled checks, from email confirmations. A litany of gifts, contributions, and support that had been meant for me, but had mysteriously ended up benefiting Brooke instead. The college fund we set up when you were born, $18,000 that was supposed to cover your first 2 years. Grandma's voice cracked as she read. Patricia told us you'd received it, even sent us a thank you card we thought was from you, but according to these records, the money was transferred to Brooke's sorority housing account. I felt the room tilt, felt my stomach drop into my shoes, because I'd taken out loans for those years, had worked myself to exhaustion at 2 part-time jobs, had eaten ramen for months to make ends meet. Grandpa took over, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles working. Your 21st birthday, we sent you a check for $3,000 and a laptop worth $1,200, both signed for and received according to the delivery confirmations Patricia sent us. He looked up at me, his eyes swimming with unshed tears. You never got those, did you? I shook my head numbly, remembering that birthday. I'd been disappointed they'd only sent a card, had told myself they were getting older and probably forgot, had swallowed down the humiliation of being overlooked once again. The laptop showed up in Brooke's Instagram photos 2 weeks later, Grandma added quietly, showing me a screenshot she'd pulled up. She said Mark bought it for her graduate school applications. The casual way my life had been stolen, piece by piece, gift by gift, made me feel like I was going to be sick. They kept going, and the numbers kept climbing in ways that made my head spin and my heart break. Christmas money that never arrived, birthday checks that were cashed by someone else, the inheritance from Great Aunt Marjorie that was supposed to be split equally, but somehow only Brooke received her share. $8,000 that I'd been told had been lost in probate. There were graduation gifts, congratulatory bonuses for my scholarship, even money Grandpa had sent when I'd mentioned my car breaking down last year that had apparently been redirected to more urgent family needs by Mom. In total, Grandpa said, his voice breaking. "We estimate that approximately $53,000 in gifts, support, and inheritances meant for you has been diverted to Brooke over the past 7 years." The number hung in the air like a bomb, and I watched my sister's face drain of all color as the full weight of what she'd benefited from became real. Brooke made this choking sound, her hands flying to her mouth, and I saw genuine horror dawn across her features. I didn't know all of that. Mom just said you didn't need help, that you were doing fine, that Grandma and Grandpa wanted to support me through school and the wedding, and she was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. And part of me wanted to comfort her, wanted to fall back into that familiar role of being the understanding one, the one who made everything okay. But Grandpa held up his hand. "Brooke, intention doesn't erase impact," he said firmly. "You've lived a life subsidized by theft from your sister, your education, your wedding, your house down payment, all of it built on money that was Claire's by right." The room fell silent, except for Brooke's crying and the ticking of that old clock. And I sat there staring at that folder of evidence, trying to comprehend that my entire adult life had been shaped by systematic theft, that every struggle I'd faced, every sacrifice I'd made, had been unnecessary because I'd actually had support. It had just been stolen before it reached me. The silence that followed Grandpa's revelation felt heavier than anything I'd ever experienced, like the air itself had turned solid and pressing. I sat there on that couch, staring at the folder full of stolen years, stolen opportunities, stolen dignity, and I felt something crystallize inside me, a clarity I'd never had before about what I needed, what I deserved, what had to change. "I need 2 things," I said finally, my voice cutting through Brooke's sobs and the oppressive quiet. Everyone turned to look at me, and I met their eyes one by one, refusing to shrink or soften or apologize for what I was about to demand. First, I need Mom to admit what she did, not with excuses, not with justifications, but a real acknowledgement that she stole from me, lied to everyone, and destroyed my trust. Grandpa nodded slowly, his expression grim but supportive. "And second," I continued, my hands clenched in my lap so tight my knuckles had gone white, "I need real boundaries with consequences. Because I'm done being the invisible daughter who gets sacrificed so everyone else can be comfortable." The words felt revolutionary coming out of my mouth, felt like I was drawing a line in the sand that couldn't be uncrossed. Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Claire, sweetheart, you deserve so much more than boundaries. You deserve restitution. You deserve justice. And you deserve a family that values you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Brooke looked up at me from where she'd collapsed on the other couch, her face blotchy and swollen, and I saw something shift in her expression. Maybe recognition, maybe shame, maybe just the beginning of understanding the damage that had been done. Grandpa stood up with that decisive energy that meant he'd made a decision, and when Richard Morrison made decisions, they tended to stick. "Helen and I have been discussing this, and we're making changes. Immediate, permanent changes," he announced, moving to his desk and pulling out fresh documents. "Our will is being rewritten as of tomorrow. The split will no longer be equal between our 2 granddaughters." Brooke gasped, her hand flying to her chest, but Grandpa held up a hand to silence her. "Brooke, you've received approximately $53,000 more than Claire over the past 7 years through theft and deception. Our estate will reflect that imbalance, ensuring Claire receives an additional $53,000 beyond whatever equal split remains." The consequence of her actions, of Mom's actions, suddenly became very real and very tangible. "Additionally," Grandma added, her voice steadier now, more resolved, "any future gifts, support, or financial assistance will go directly to the intended recipient with verification required. No more trusting Patricia to be the intermediary." I watched Mom, who'd been silent and small in the corner armchair, flinch at that statement like she'd been slapped. "And Claire," Grandpa turned to face me fully, "I'm setting up a separate account in your name only, with $10,000 as an immediate apology for what was stolen and what we failed to see." The generosity of it, the acknowledgement of it, made my throat tight with emotion. This wasn't just about money. This was about someone finally saying, You matter. You were wronged, and we're going to make it right. It was about reclaiming my self-worth in concrete, undeniable ways. But I knew that financial restitution wasn't enough, that boundaries only worked if they were enforced, and that the real test would come in how my family responded going forward. I also need space from Mom, I said. The words harder to get out than I'd expected. I can't have a relationship with someone who's stolen from me and lied to my face for years without serious therapy and real change. Mom made this wounded sound, started to protest. But Grandpa's sharp look silenced her. Patricia, you've lost the right to object. You created this situation, and now you'll live with the consequences, he said firmly. I felt this strange mixture of grief and relief, because cutting ties, even temporarily, with your mother feels like amputating a limb, but sometimes that's what you do to save the rest of the body. And as I sat there surrounded by the wreckage of my family's dysfunction, I knew this moment was either going to destroy us completely or force us to rebuild something honest. I left Grandpa's house that evening with my SUV keys in my pocket, and a weird mixture of vindication and exhaustion weighing on my chest, like I'd won a battle but the war was far from over. My phone had been buzzing nonstop for the past hour. Texts and calls from family members who'd apparently gotten Mom's version of events, which I could only imagine painted me as the ungrateful villain tearing the family apart. But the call that finally broke through my emotional armor came around 9 p.m., when I was sitting in my tiny apartment staring at the keys to a car I'd never even known existed until that morning. Dad's name flashed across my screen, and something in my stomach twisted because I'd been waiting for this, dreading this, knowing he'd eventually have to pick a side. Claire, honey, can we talk? Dad's voice came through careful and measured, using that tone he deployed when he was trying to de-escalate what he considered drama. I should have known right then where this was heading. Should have recognized the pattern. But some stupid part of me hoped he'd surprise me. Sure, Dad, I said, my voice flat, already bracing for impact. He sighed. That long-suffering sound he made when he thought people were being unreasonable. Look, I know you're upset about the car situation, and I get it. I really do. But I think maybe we all need to take a step back and think about the bigger picture here. The bigger picture. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Couldn't believe he was already minimizing this. Already trying to smooth everything over like it was just some minor family drama instead of systematic theft and betrayal. Dad, Mom stole from me. She committed fraud. She lied to Grandpa. She diverted over $50,000 that was meant for me, I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. This isn't about being upset. This is about actual crimes. There was a pause, long enough that I thought maybe, just maybe, he was actually considering what I'd said. Then he spoke, and his words felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. Claire, I know your mother made some questionable decisions, but she was trying to help Brooke during a difficult time. And I really think we can work this out as a family without getting lawyers and grandparents involved. The way he said questionable decisions, like Mom had just picked the wrong paint color, not systematically robbed me for years, made rage flare hot in my chest. You knew, I said suddenly, the realization hitting me like ice water. Dad, you knew about this. You had to have known. The silence on the other end was deafening, confirming everything. You knew Mom gave Brooke my car. You knew about the money. You knew I was being cheated. And you said nothing. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. Claire, it's more complicated than that. Your mother and I discussed what we thought was best for both our daughters. And sometimes that means making difficult allocation decisions. Allocation decisions. He'd actually just called stealing from me an allocation decision, like I was a line item in a budget, not his daughter who'd been systematically erased and exploited. Let me be very clear, I said, my voice going cold and steady in a way I'd never heard from myself before. What you're asking me to do is keep quiet about being stolen from, victimized, and lied to, so that Mom and Brooke don't face consequences for their actions. You want peace without justice, comfort without accountability. Dad started to protest, started with some speech about family unity and forgiveness, but I cut him off. Peace without justice isn't peace, Dad. It's just me swallowing my pain so everyone else can pretend we're fine, and I'm done doing that. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Could almost picture him rubbing his temples like I was giving him a headache by refusing to be a doormat. Claire, if you keep pushing this, you're going to tear this family apart, he warned. And there it was. The threat wrapped in concern, the manipulation disguised as wisdom. But what he didn't understand was that this family had already been torn apart years ago, when they'd decided Brooke mattered more than me. I was just finally done pretending the wound didn't exist. The weeks after that phone call with Dad blurred together in this strange pattern of grief, anger, and something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I'd blocked Mom's number, limited contact with Dad to occasional brief texts, and Brooke had gone completely silent, which honestly felt like a relief more than a loss. But Grandpa and Grandma stepped into the void my parents left with a fierceness that surprised me, calling every few days, inviting me to dinners, and most importantly, making good on their promise to support me in concrete ways. The $10,000 they'd put in my account sat there like a safety net I'd never had before, and for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, wasn't one emergency away from financial catastrophe. That freedom changed something fundamental in how I moved through the world. With that weight lifted, I did something I'd been putting off for 2 years. I enrolled back in school to finish my degree. The community college welcomed me back with open arms, and suddenly I was taking classes in marketing and business management, subjects I'd abandoned when money got too tight, and survival became more important than dreams. My professors noticed something different about me this semester. I wasn't the exhausted girl in the back row anymore, half asleep from working double shifts and barely scraping by. I participated. I asked questions. I turned in assignments early. And I felt this hunger for knowledge that had been suppressed under years of just trying to keep my head above water. Reclaiming my education felt like reclaiming pieces of myself I'd lost, or buried, or been forced to sacrifice. Work changed too. I'd been stuck in the same administrative assistant position for 3 years. Too afraid to rock the boat or ask for more, conditioned by my family to believe I should just be grateful for what I had. But something about facing down my mother's theft and my father's complicity had given me this new backbone, this ability to advocate for myself that I'd never possessed before. I marched into my boss's office and asked for the promotion I'd been quietly hoping for, laid out my accomplishments, my reliability, my ideas for improving our systems. She looked surprised, probably because I'd been so passive for so long. But 2 weeks later, I got the promotion and an $8,000 raise. The payback wasn't against my family. It was for myself, proving that when I wasn't being systematically undermined, I could actually thrive. The SUV became my sanctuary, my physical reminder that I deserved good things, that I had worth beyond what my family had assigned me. I'd drive to campus with my coffee in the cup holder, music playing through speakers I'd never dreamed of owning, and feel this quiet satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or vengeance, and everything to do with justice. I wasn't getting even with anyone. I was getting whole, filling in the spaces that had been carved out by years of neglect and theft. Grandpa would text me sometimes, asking how classes were going, how work was treating me, and I'd send him updates that made him respond with pride that brought tears to my eyes. "You're not just surviving anymore, Claire. You're building something," he wrote once, and that message stayed pinned in my phone like a mantra. Around month 4 of this new life, something unexpected happened. Brooke reached out, not with excuses or demands, but with something that almost resembled humility. Her baby had been born, a little girl named Sophie, and apparently motherhood had given her some perspective she'd lacked before. "I'm sorry," was all the text said, followed by, "Can we talk?" I stared at those words for a long time, feeling the old instinct to rush in and forgive, to smooth things over and pretend everything was fine. But I'd learned something important in these months of distance and growth. Forgiveness without change was just enabling, and I deserved better than empty apologies. I didn't respond right away, didn't rush to heal a wound that was still raw, but I also didn't block her number. Maybe someday we'd rebuild something, but it would be on my terms, with my boundaries, and only if she proved through actions, not words, that she understood the betrayal and was willing to make real amends. 1 year after that shocking Sunday at Grandpa's house, I stood in a cap and gown on a sunny May afternoon, waiting to walk across the stage and receive my bachelor's degree in business management. The quad was packed with families celebrating, cameras flashing, balloons bobbing in the spring breeze. And there in the third row sat Grandpa Richard and Grandma Helen, waving at me with tears streaming down their faces and holding a sign that said, "So proud of you, Claire." The absence of my parents should have hurt, should have cast a shadow over this moment. But honestly, I felt lighter without them, freer without the constant weight of their disappointment or their prioritization of Brooke over everything else. This achievement was mine, earned through my own determination, supported by people who actually valued me, untainted by theft or lies or manipulation. As I walked across that stage and shook the dean's hand, accepting that diploma I'd fought so hard for, I realized something profound. The real revenge wasn't recovering the SUV, wasn't exposing Mom's fraud, wasn't even the $53,000 adjustment in Grandpa's will. The real revenge was this: me thriving, me succeeding, me proving that I had worth and capability that existed completely independent of my family's recognition. I'd spent so many years believing the narrative they'd fed me, that I was just okay, just average, just the daughter who'd figure it out on her own because she wasn't special enough to invest in. But standing there with my degree in hand and a job promotion already secured and a savings account that actually had money in it, I knew that narrative had been a lie, designed to keep me small and compliant. The celebration dinner that night at Grandpa's favorite steakhouse felt like a coronation, like I was finally being seen and celebrated in ways I'd craved my entire life. Grandma gave me a pearl necklace that had belonged to her mother, and Grandpa handed me an envelope that contained keys to a small investment account he'd set up in my name. "For your future, sweetheart, whatever you want to build," he said, his voice thick with emotion. We toasted with expensive wine, laughed about my awkward graduation photos, and for the first time in my 23 years, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. Like I had people in my corner who weren't just tolerating me, but actively championing me. The absence of Mom, Dad, and Brooke from this celebration should have felt like failure. But instead, it felt like clarity, like I'd finally stopped begging for scraps from people who'd never planned to feed me anyway. 2 weeks after graduation, something shifted in my relationship with Brooke. She'd been slowly, carefully rebuilding trust through consistent actions rather than empty words. She'd started therapy, had confronted Mom about the pattern of favoritism and manipulation, and had even offered to pay back some of the money through monthly installments she could barely afford. We met for coffee, awkward and tentative, and she showed me pictures of baby Sophie, while admitting how much motherhood had changed her perspective. I look at her, and I think about what kind of family I want her to grow up in, Brooke said quietly, her eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion and tears. And I realize we grew up in something toxic, something that pitted us against each other, and I participated in that. I benefited from it, and I'm so sorry, Claire. The apology wasn't enough to erase years of betrayal, but it was a start, a foundation we might someday build something real on. As summer rolled in and I settled into my promoted role at work, I'd sometimes catch my reflection in the rearview mirror of that burgundy SUV and barely recognize the woman staring back. She looked confident, purposeful, like someone who knew her worth and wouldn't settle for less. And I guess that's exactly what I'd become. The shocking truth I'd discovered through all of this wasn't just about stolen cars or diverted money. It was about how I'd been conditioned to accept crumbs, to believe I didn't deserve better, to sacrifice my dignity so others could shine brighter. Winning back my place in this world hadn't required grand gestures or dramatic confrontations. It required the daily choice to value myself, to set boundaries, to demand justice and respect and honesty. And as I drove toward whatever future I was building, I knew the greatest vengeance against people who tried to make me invisible was simply this: becoming impossible to ignore. So here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you ever discovered that the people who were supposed to protect you were actually the ones holding you back, stealing opportunities, or rewriting your story to benefit someone else? Drop a comment below and tell me, What would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought for justice like I did? Or would you have chosen peace and let it go? And here's the real question that keeps me up at night. Do you think family loyalty should have limits? Or is forgiveness always the answer, even when there's been systematic betrayal? I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts, your experiences, your own stories of navigating family dysfunction, because I've learned through all of this that we're not alone in these struggles, even when we feel completely isolated. Share your truth in the comments. Be raw, be honest, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today to start reclaiming their own worth. If this resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or question something you've been accepting for too long, make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we're going to keep diving into these uncomfortable, provocative, real conversations about family dynamics, self-worth, and what it actually means to choose yourself when everyone else expects you to stay small. Your dignity matters, your story matters, and I can't wait to hear what you have to say.